Councilmember Rice will be joining us shortly. Our understanding procedurally is that obviously this should be a joint committee hearing, but we don't have a quorum from our colleagues on the Education Committee. So this officially will be an HHS committee hearing until Councilmember Rice arrives, with Councilmember Jawando joining us. But we will go through and take action. But the notes will obviously have to reflect that this is until the Education Committee joins us in HHS committee session. So, Ms. Yao, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Okay, so on pages 1 to 3 of your packet is a summary of what the joint committee had done previously. Sorry. On pages 1 to 3 of your packet is a summary of what the joint committees had acted on previously. There was one item that council staff wanted to bring to your attention, and it's related to the Early Childhood Education NDA. Council staff understands that the Education Committee talked with MCPS at its budget meeting yesterday and indicated that for its new Early Childhood Center, that they would be using $1 million from the NDA. And so, the Ed Committee, again, looking at MCPS's budget, sanctioned that. But since the NDA falls within the Joint Committee's jurisdiction, just wanted to give you the heads up that that was identified as one of the uses, and thus $1 million will be appropriated of that funding will be appropriated into the MCBS budget, and the total NDA would reduce to $6 million.
Councilmember Jawando.
Yeah, and just a finer point on that, my understanding, Vivian, was that what we did in education yesterday was to appropriate to the MCPS or designate into the MCPS budget that $1 million, correct?
Right, but the source, if it's coming
Source is
from
from the NDA.
then yeah, then,
Right, but it will go to MCPS and will be counted in MOE
yes.
going forward, and so, okay, all right.
Okay. The first item for discussion is the school health nurse staffing issue that the Joint Committee discussed at the last meeting. Again, the Joint Committee received a briefing about the levels of school health nurses and how that was of concern. Sorry. As a result, there was a memo drafted by the chairs and sent to the executive requesting that there be a budget adjustment that accounted for 12 additional nurse positions. We haven't heard back from the executive, and absent that, council staff would recommend putting those positions on the reconciliation list.
Mr. Water.
So OMB had a chance to speak with the executive about this yesterday afternoon. Unfortunately, due to the county's ongoing fiscal challenges, he will not be sending over an amendment for the 12 school nurses.
So yes, we will move forward with putting it on the reconciliation list then.
The next item was something that the council president had requested, coming back on George B. Thomas. So there's additional information in your package. She was requesting specific information about whether there's a development director funded in their budget, as well as the numbers of low-income children that are served through the program. So for fiscal year 20, the recommended funding is $954,529, which is level funded from fiscal year 19. The executive staff reports that there is funding in the George B. Thomas program of $86,800 to support a development director. However, that position has not been filled, at least in the past, and the program has sought budget modifications to use some of that funding for grant writing and assessment. The table on page 4 of your package shows the total numbers of students served in the Saturday school program in fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19 to date, as well as an approximate number of students that are FARMS, LEP, and special ed designated.
Okay, we've got two lights. Let's start with Councilmember Glass, followed by Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Ms. Yao, if we could drill down a little bit on this. The $86,800, is that what's currently allocated for this position? And has that been offset with hiring, to the best of your or anyone else's knowledge, has that been offset instead of hiring a development director, hiring other similar staff?
So we have Khadijah Barkley from George B. Thomas here, and she can field those questions.
Excellent.
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
So the funds that have been allocated for a development director, according to this information, that position hasn't been filled, but other types of development positions have been filled. Can you elaborate as to how internally you've been handling that function?
So that is correct. We have not utilized the Director of Development line item. We have requested a budget modification. This year, we've been basically writing grants, and we did a capital campaign at the end of the year, and we're also planning a golf tournament at the end of this month. But we've basically been putting in place the processes and procedures that we've been using over the years when we've had a Director of Development. We are interviewing for that position now, and we look to fill that position by the 15th of this month. But we did request a budget modification so that we could utilize a portion of that fund for an assessment tool that we've utilized this year to show student growth from the beginning to the middle to the end of the year. I know that the county has really been looking at hearing, the impact of our program, and so we did put in our budget some funds for an assessment tool this year.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that, and glad to hear that your hiring process is moving forward. That should be exciting. And one last question regarding this. When an individual is brought in as the development director, the increase in funds that hopefully that person will generate through that position, will those additional funds be used to expand either the program or capacity, or will those additional funds be an offset to future county support to the organization?
So in conjunction with our board of directors, we look to do both. So we look to expand our teaching staff to decrease our teacher-to-student ratio, which is really important on Saturday mornings for our program. So that's one part. And then the second part is to, of course, increase our reserve and our operating costs. So that, of course, the goal eventually is that we would be able to utilize the Director of Development and the money that they raise to vary our funding sources so that we're moving more towards corporate sponsorship and, additional grants so that we're not relying as heavily on county funds.
You get an A for that response.
Thank you.
That's what I hope the investment would go towards, towards expanding the program, which is vitally important to the community, but expanding funding options so that we don't have to have this be such a critical conversation to the ongoing work that you're doing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Albanaz. Good to see you. I've got my George B. Thomas mug, okay?
And that is lovely.
Yes, I'm sure you'd be happy about that. Thank you for providing the data, and I think now this is officially a joint committee here.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. And we talked about this, but I want to see these numbers as far as farms and LEP and special ed continuing to go in the direction that they're going. 46.5% in FY18, 50% in 19. And I just want to have you confirm what is my understanding that your goal is to expand those, keep those numbers going in that direction as far as serving the population that needs it the most. Obviously open to everybody, but we want to make sure that we're really capturing those students and why the social media and other things can potentially help you do that. I just want to let you speak to that.
Yes, so our target audience is always the underserved community, so our African American and Latino students that tend to lag behind their white and Asian counterparts. So that's always our targeted audience. We're looking at ways to partner even more with our school-based principals to have strategic outreach to those students and families. Another way that we're looking to expand is to utilize social media to further reach our middle school and high school students so that they're coming for bridge projects and that they're coming for SAT prep, and that the more and more the community, we've been doing this for 30 years, but there are many people in our community that still do not know about the affordable nature of this tutoring that's offered. And many parents are still going out and paying an exorbitant amount for individual tutoring when we have affordable options. And so we're looking at expanding our social media, but continuing to focus on that target population.
I think the work with the schools will be helpful because, you know, the fact that you look at 46% or 50% are farms, that means 50% aren't. And that means not only are these students getting great value, I've been to many programs, and to your point of whether you're paying $85 for the whole program, the many, many weeks, you have a lot of people taking advantage of this. So we want to make sure, in addition to Councilmember Glass's point of how do we transition the funding as well and make you more self-sustainable, not just solely reliable on the county's investment, obviously that's critical, but we want to keep those numbers of underserved students going up. So I appreciate your work, and I look forward to coming to the golf tournament.
And the closing ceremony.
And the closing ceremony. Okay, yes, let's make sure, duly noted.
Councilmember Rice?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I apologize sincerely for being late this morning. And so please put me in the record of being supportive of our nursing staffing. That's incredibly important. You know, I've been a big fan of George B. Thomas for a very long time. And it's one in which I've visited numerous times to numerous locations and seen the work. We as a committee, both in Health and Human Services and in education, formerly now Education and Culture, have always been concerned about the fees and how that affects our lower income students. I would like to see us get to a place where we're actually lowering the fee, and so achieving that balance, understanding that even $40, while not a lot, is a lot, right? And, you know, when people are making a choice between, you know, it just all culminates together. Last night I was just at Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless's Gala, and we were raising money for groceries for folks, and said, you know, that $500 donation would provide 10 families with groceries for a week. So that's $50 of groceries for a week for some folks, right? So that $40 makes a big difference from that perspective. And so it really is one where I think that we're going to have to be cognizant of that and talk about that over the summer and ways in which we can continue to strategize. I certainly am, and while I didn't hear Councilmember Glass's points, I think that there does need to be that balance. I know that there are folks out there in the community that care deeply about the work that you do. And so working together with your development folks, we can try and leverage to make sure, because I don't think that people understand enough about what Saturday school does. And that's unfortunate because I get the calls. Every single time I get the calls, George B. Thomas, Saturday school. So I know that you're doing your part, but it's still one of those in which I don't think that enough people know. And if people aren't knowing enough to even know about the program, then they're not going to know enough about development as well. And so from that perspective, I think that we collectively can do a better job of marketing this to folks, which will help to give us the funds to balance that. So it's a long conversation that's been out there for a very long time, right? And so I want to continue to work with you to try and make that happen, because I know right now the funds just aren't there and you have to balance it the way you need to. But I do look forward to working with you and trying to make that happen. So, yeah, please.
If I could add, where there are options and opportunities, when I have conversations with principals or schools or parents, as a part of the contract, we offer, I think we're supposed to offer between 200 and 300 scholarships per year. So there are students that do attend Saturday school free of charge, where there is, of course, a hardship or a need. So that's the first thing. And the second thing I wanted to say is that we are looking for additional opportunities to partner with other entities that are supported by Health and Human Services. So for instance, I'm not sure if McHale is supported by Health and Human Services, but we partner with McHale to offer adult literacy courses at a couple of our centers, and those students attend Saturday school, the parents attend adult literacy classes, and that just creates a win-win. So we're looking for additional opportunities to be able to do that as well.
All of that is perfect and right in line, and so I look forward to working with you on ways in which we can continue to leverage those kinds of relationships. So thank you very much for the great work you guys continue to do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. So I certainly concur and agree with everything that's been said so far, and I'd just like to add two things, and with Dr. Bryce there sitting next to you, to fully evaluate programs like George B. Thomas and all enrichment kinds of activities requires the full engagement of MCPS and our outcomes officers to really be able to tell the full and complete story. And it's tough because we understandably have to protect the privacy of the children and youth that are in our care and custody, and that's why finding common ground in how to access those data points has been challenging. I think we've made a lot of headway through Excel Beyond the Bell and through partnerships with HHS, and so there is a path forward. But for us to, because I think this program absolutely has the potential to secure national funding, but to truly prove its efficacy is going to require data that only MCPS can provide. And you can track social and emotional outcomes, you can track the percentage of farm students, but at the end of the day, what we really need to know is this having an impact in the classroom? So, Dr. Bryce, I know that you've been fans and have been great partners of George B. Thomas, but if you could talk a little bit about what MCPS's plan is from an outcomes perspective moving forward, because I think there's an opportunity for a longitudinal study, and also for us to look at a comparison and contrast with other schools that don't have George B. Thomas if we're really going to do this well, acknowledging that it costs money too. It's not just about the privacy and security issues.
Yeah, so thank you. I think from Jonathan Bryce, MCPS, from an evaluation, program evaluation point, we certainly want to make sure that we're providing the best value for the taxpayer dollars, and we believe that George B. Thomas provides that level of service. Moving forward, it is clearly open for consideration what type of evaluation we will engage with George B. Thomas in, so that we're able to capture that data and then be able to share it publicly, whether it be on a dashboard or in some other method. The one thing that I would suggest is a concern that we, and as you mentioned, we do have a way forward, but is a concern. George B. Thomas is not an apples to apples comparison between schools that have and schools that don't, because even in schools that may not have George B. Thomas learning academies, what they do have are other structures. So that's where we need our researchers to tease out and to isolate the different variables so that we can say, all right, so a student attended George B. Thomas and they attended for these following reasons, and then we can track their performance and their growth over time. So that is something that we are clearly interested in. It's another, a 30-year track record gives us a lot of confidence that what we've been doing is the right thing for a large number of students. But we recognize the importance of increasing the quantitative and qualitative data that we're providing, so that it sends the message to everybody that we are really outcomes-based, evidence-based, and we believe in being able to show the progress that we're making. So I would expect that over the next year, you would see proposals that talk about what that evaluation is going to be moving forward.
And, you know, whomever is assigned to partner with George B. Thomas on this effort, just consistency in having the staff person be involved in the project development is really important, because in the past, some of what's taken time is that somebody's been assigned to it, then they're assigned to something else, and then you got to start all over again with the person who's been assigned. Right. So I think that consistency in having somebody that George B. Thomas can work with over a couple of years will be really important. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my understanding was there was a research study, correct? And it didn't, could you explain, let me let you explain what that showed, when that happened and what that showed.
So the Office of Shared Accountability is the, like the keeper of the data, so to speak. And they did a one-year evaluation of the George B. Thomas Senior Learning Academy, and they found a statistically significant difference between students, elementary students that were attending Saturday school and elementary students that were not attending Saturday school, so apples versus apples. They did not find as much data or a statistically significant difference in middle school or high school students. That was 1 year. Like Dr. Bryce said, we've been doing this for 30 years. So what we have to do is have a process. We do have a data sharing agreement, which is an upgrade. And so at the
How long has that been in place?
2 years now. When we did the presentation at the Board of Education on April 9th, our student member of the board actually requested a longitudinal study from the Office of Shared Accountability. So there has actually been a formal request for that. So I'm hopeful that that will be coming soon because our Board of Education was definitely wanting to see return on investment and impact. And so I'm proud to be able to offer that and to be able to continue to make that request and work collaboratively with the Office of Shared Accountability to be able to offer additional data.
You know, as we're obviously contributing $1 million. We think it's worth it. I've seen it up close, but we want the data, to Councilman Robinhauser's point, to leverage more recognition and more interest and more, we want to get this to more students, but we need to be able to show that. And that's helpful. I'm glad to hear that. And then also the other point I want to make is students, even if there's not a program at their school, students come from other places, right? So that's the other thing, is that it's not school-based solely.
Yes,
right?
so there's a cluster model.
Right.
So the high school center serves the entire cluster of schools. And we even have some students that will attend one location on one Saturday when they're with one guardian, and another location on another Saturday when they were with a different guardian. So we do have 12 different locations, and so it's flexible in terms of which center the students attend, but we do serve the entire cluster of students.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Rice.
So it's interesting because I'm going to try and challenge Councilmember Leventhal, who I saw last night at Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless, and I know that he was one of the leading ones who asked for that data, who was very concerned about that. So we asked and said, look, we're giving a lot of money, we want to see the data. But it's interesting because I looked at the OSA report, and I remember it a little bit differently because, and that's why I wanted to, because it did show, when I look at baseline evidence of learning attainment, in elementary school, you had a 67% literacy met, 52% math met. At middle school, you had a 66% literacy met and 53% math met. And then at high school, you had an 87.5% literacy met and 74% for math met. Now, what I want to also say is that the folks that are coming, not all, but a lot of the folks that are coming to George B. Thomas Saturday School are the ones who are struggling to begin with.
Correct.
And need the additional help. So what we're doing is we're building on a population that is not performing right now or struggling or having challenges right now. If we help half of that contingent, we are doing incredibly well because those are the folks who are not performing right now. So even if we get to half, that's a huge win for us in terms of, so I just want to make sure from the statistical perspective that we're understanding that we're building on the success that's already happening within our schools within MCPS. And what we're taking is we're not always taking just the performing students. There are a few of them, right, who may be struggling 1 week and they come in because they have a concept that they need assistance with. But I'm talking about, these are a lot of the kids who just aren't getting anything about, look, I'm in algebra, I just don't get it, I've got a D or an E right now, and I need some help. And if you take a person like that and you've got a cohort of 10 of those children, and you get 5 of them to meeting performance, that's huge. That's the achievement opportunity equity gap. And for us to have numbers like that, is actually a success.
Yes.
Huge success compared to what we see happening in the nation. And I'm doing this research within the Kerwin Commission right now. So let me just tell you, based on the numbers that I see, if you have a success ratio like that, that's incredible. So I just want to, and again, I would like to see those numbers updated, right? And would like to see the dashboard similar to what we're seeing with the dashboard with MCPS. So I want to certainly see that to continue to track that data, which should be easy now that we have all of that information that's coupled together. And so I'm not sure if we also need to have an MOU between George B. Thomas and MCPS. I'll let you guys, the powers that be, work on that. We don't need to get involved in that. But certainly, whatever it is that facilitates that data sharing, I think that that's incredibly important. But just want to highlight that that's what I see in the OSA report. And so that's a great thing. Dr. Bryce.
So, sir, clearly, we believe in the program. We believe in the work that our young people are doing. And I think there's also another point. When we're seeing these gains, especially at earlier ages, it is putting young people on a trajectory, on a pathway to taking more rigorous courses later in elementary and in middle school and in high school. And so the effect is not only immediate, but it also has a long-term impact on access and opportunity, which is something that as a district we're very focused on.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Let's move on to the next item.
Okay, then we're coming back to the linkages to learning and school-based health center CIP amendment from the executive. It provides $1.01 million over the 6-year period. It's an umbrella project that provides for linkages to learning centers and school-based health centers. There are 4 projects that are being added as in the amendment. That's planning funding for Lee Middle School, Silver Spring International Middle School, Gaithersburg Elementary School number 8. It's a new elementary school in the Gaithersburg cluster, and Cresthaven and Roscoe Nix Elementary Schools. And those are all 4 linkages to learning sites. There's also funding recommended for construction for Lee Middle School. And these are tied to major school construction projects. We had requested an expenditure schedule for each project, and that wasn't available when the Joint Committee first met, and it's now showing on the table of page 5 of your packet. Council staff notes that the Lee Middle School addition and facility upgrade was identified as a potential candidate for a non-recommended reduction. So council staff recommends approving the funding as recommended by the executive, consistent with the council's final reconciliation decisions for MCPS projects. If Lee Middle School, if that project is delayed, then council staff would recommend delaying the project funding under this project. In addition, though, since the Joint Committee had requested a work group come together to talk about linkages expansion and where it would, where it would best be to inform the upcoming 6-year CIP discussion, council staff also recommends seeking cost estimates and feasibility determinations for program space at school sites that are not priorities, that are priorities based on their Ever Farms list, but are not slated for major school construction. So that, for example, Watkins Mill, Montgomery Village Middle School, Neelsville Middle School, Jackson Road Elementary School, those have very significant farms rates, actually above the sites that are being recommended, in this project. But because they're not up for major school construction, they haven't been, put forward in the recommendation. But linkages has, in previous situations, found money to to site facilities where there isn't major school construction going on. So at least, I think getting the information of how much it costs, you might decide that you want to tie it to school construction, but if the amounts are not terribly significant and you want to address these high needs communities, it's good information to have.
Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much. It concerns me when a school like Ebrook Lee, where I held one of my education budget forums with Dr. Smith, and the main reason why we did so is to highlight some of the inequities that we've seen at that school. I will just say that, being a little bit parochial, that would have been my middle school, my home middle school, if I hadn't gone to Tacoma Park. And to see it in basically the same condition as it was when I would have attended is not okay. It's not okay for that East County community. It's not okay for the level of Ever Farms and for a community of majority of color that's in that area. It's not okay. And so I'll be fighting very hard to make sure that we keep that on track. And I want to make sure that for some of my parents that may be listening at home, who Dr. Smith and I said, look, this is a project we believe in. Let me be very clear that while I understand where council staff is in saying, look, if it's delayed, we have to delay the other part of it as well, I am not open for a delay. And so let me signal to OMB to please send that message, just as I sent a message about full funding for MCPS. There are some things that are non-starters, and this is one of them. This is something that I think that, again, as we talk about equity, and as the county executive and the council president have led this discussion around equity, and all of us as council members continue to push this, this is one of the ones that's at the forefront. And so I hope that I've signaled, as I have before, some of the things that are certainly there. Vivian, I think that you touched on E as well, or not yet? Okay, okay. Let me just say that, again, any expansion of what we're looking to do when it comes to our linkages, and I know that Chair Albornoz and I are pretty much on the same page here. We know the great work that's being done by these programs. Of course, we have to stay within financial reason. And so certainly we'll continue to try and do as many of these as possible, but understand that within limitations. But, you know, we need to get to a place where we have this strategy moving forward on how we're going to continue to expand and coordinate that with MCPS and any other types of projects that are going on as well. It's one of the reasons why with new construction, I've pushed so much, and you guys have done it and been responsive when it comes to building shells so that we can have that additional flexible space to do things just like this, right? Whether it's space for Rec Extra, whether it's space for EBB, whether it's space for linkages, all those kinds of things. We need to be forward thinking, whether it's space for pre-K, right? We need to be intentional about what it is that we're doing moving forward, understanding that we still have to catch up with a lot of these others. And so I applaud MCPS for continuing to do that when it comes to Maryvale and others that are out there really thinking about and looking at ways in which we can continue to push that momentum forward. So that's it. I don't have I agree with council staff in terms of that, but just wanted to make that statement about Lee. And then also say that we definitely need to come back to this over the summer and create a strategic plan, working with our partners to ensure that we can get something that gives the community certainty about our path forward. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I can't say that any better and associate myself with those comments. Let's move on to item E, the linkages expansion.
Okay, so the Education Committee Chair, actually the Education and HHS Committee Chairs requested that we come back to the Linkages to Learning budget to address two top priority items on the Linkages to Learning strategic 6-year plan. That would provide a full staffing complement for the Summit Hall Elementary and Kemp Mill Elementary School programs. Because of how those programs came about, they don't have full staffing. And so because they're at the highest of the Ever Farms list, the strategic plan puts them in line in terms of expansion to bring their staffing complement up to the level that other programs are. So that would include $30,917 for the Kemp Mill program and $36,629 for the Summit Hall program. OMB had mentioned that the Summit Hall program, there's a little bit of complication because that is actually staffed by county government employees rather than a nonprofit provider. So there has to be a little bit of checking in about the part-time position and whether, the person that's in it can expand to full-time, et cetera. But that's what the cost would be.
Thank you, Ms. Yao, and I want to thank my friend, Councilmember Rice, for joining me in this request. Ms. Yao summarized it perfectly. These are two extraordinarily high-need schools, and we are aware of the incredible impact of linkages programs. And without delay, we'd like to ensure that the schools receive the same level of resources as other successful programs. This is an investment, and the earlier we can intervene and provide the kinds of holistic services that linkages provides, the better we will all be as a system and as a community. So that's why we're requesting full funding for those positions, acknowledging that there are some logistics and different details that need to be worked out, but we're confident that they will be. Councilmember Jawando.
Just a question, and so what's needed to get it to the full stat complement? Could you just, I'm not.
Sure.
Thank you.
Erica Lopez-Fan, Office of Management and Budget. It would just be recognizing that there would be an additional 0.5 FTE that would be added to HHS's budget, and then also speaking with the person who actually occupies the position to be sure they actually have the capacity to move to a full-time position. So currently they're at part-time, just to make sure
Got it.
there's
So
the
just
interest. Yeah.
Making sure the person who's currently there could go full-time. Okay, got it. All right. Thank you. I'm obviously supportive.
Okay, without objection?
Okay, and the last items are related to proposals for mental health services for youth. The first memorandum that is in your packet at Circle 15 is from Council Members Jawando, HHS Committee Chair Albernaz, and Councilmember Friedson. And it's requesting funding of $54,750 to be added to the reconciliation list to fund expansion of EveryMind's text and chat hours of operation, to include 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. every day. Currently, the hours of operation extend to 9 p.m., and there's interest in providing additional support for periods of high demand for text and chats when children or youth are typically alone, incredibly vulnerable, and in need of support.
I had the opportunity to visit EveryMind a few months ago and was already aware of their incredible work and how important it is, and was really moved by the conversation from staff regarding the need to expand the hours of this program, acknowledging we've had, unfortunately, tragedy occur on now multiple years in a row within MCPS. And so I appreciate Councilmember Jawando and Councilmember Friedson advancing this, and I was honored and proud to associate myself with this request. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and really happy that you're on it as well. And as we said in the letter, with suicide being the second leading cause of death between people ages 10 to 24, I think we kind of remind people of that in the tragedies we've seen. Anything we can do to expand the access and availability, and we have another proposal after this for our students that are seeking help. I did want to give Dr. Crow, who I know is here, a chance to ask him a question about this. My understanding is, while this specific proposal here is to expand from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m., which are critical hours when I know the teenagers I know are very active. There is another gap, and what's the current? Could you explain to me what the current services are?
Sure. Good morning, Raymond Kroll, Chief of Behavioral Health and Crisis Services. We have been. This is 30 seconds of history around this. We've had a hotline system in the county for many years that has been responsive for, it has taken calls for suicide and suicidal ideation for folks. As you point out, young folks have a different approach to this. They are texters and chatters and not so much talking on the phone. So that's their preferred mode of interacting with folks. It also gives them a level of anonymity that they might not have in a phone conversation. The evenings are where the greatest risk of elevation occurs in our young people. Most of our young people may be out doing things and having fun and engaging with other folks. There are a group of folks who are sitting at home alone, who are sitting in isolation and feeling hopeless and helpless. text and chat serves that group of folks. We have been working to expand this out so that we have 24/7 text and chat. We started with the weekdays in the main time, in the main hours of the day. We added the weekends to that. This would obviously add that period where we're seeing an additional need. The daytime numbers that I think you had been in discussion were from 8 to noon. There's a relative difference. The higher need, because folks in the evening, because there's a sense of greater likelihood of being alone and being isolated. During the school day, and during the week especially, our thinking is that our experience is that they are oft times with other schoolmates or other classmates. There's often a place where they can go to, someone in the school they can contact. The challenge is that that's not true for everyone. So obviously there will be folks who will not want to reach out. There are folks, anecdotally we learned that some folks don't want to end up being sent to the crisis center, and so they don't let an adult know what's going on. We have been working with students in the school system to create Be the One movement where students can help each other, can ask, can support each other. Text and chat is one of the ways that would be useful to refer and connect children up during the school day. That's not where we are at this point, obviously, in terms of the request, but I think that is ultimately our goal, would be to expand it out.
I appreciate you saying that, and I just want, for the benefit of my colleagues, that I think while this is, I think we, this year, this is probably what we can add. I am sensitive to that 8 a.m. to noon time not being covered, and but appreciate the support of my colleagues and would ask that this be added to the reconciliation list.
Councilmember Rice.
So let me just share an anecdote with you about what's happening in our schools. My daughter attends Kingsview Middle School, and I do periodic checks of her cell phone, as I suggest every parent does. And I saw a troubling text chat between her and 2 other students that concerned my wife and I. So I started to dig deeper and looked at some of the other, her history, and looking up some different websites and things of that nature, and actually found a discussion between her and a mental health professional online. One of her friends was considering suicide. And my daughter had reached out to try and ask this person what she should say to her to make sure that she didn't commit suicide. This is the real story that's happening each and every day, all the time. And so by having these connections and these lifelines for kids to provide support means a tremendous amount. I've seen it, and now in working with those particular students and the parents, we're getting help for somebody who knows what the situation may have been. There are a lot of people who talk about committing suicide who don't. But there are, unfortunately, a lot of people who talk about it who do. And it's one in which providing as many resources as possible, understanding that, again, especially in our LGBTQI community, where this affects people a lot. And, I defer to Councilmember Glass, who's done a lot of work in this area and knows all too well, but like I said, I've seen it. And it's one in which, for me, is incredibly important for us to do. And so I applaud my colleagues for taking a leadership role and making sure that this happens. But I agree with Councilmember Jawando, this is just the beginning. Dr. Kroll and I have had this conversation many times before, and I know that Councilmember Jawando also, and Chair Albornoz also have another proposal dealing with mental health and expanding that service, which Dr. Kroll and I have talked about. We need to continue to expand this as much as possible. It's a troubling trend that I see that's out there, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And so from that perspective, just think about what's happening in our communities right now and the level of discrimination that's happening in our schools and what that means. Regardless of whether you go to school with a child and you hear that they've been called the N-word, and that they're putting pictures on blackface, and you've never experienced that before. Keep in mind, we have a generation of students who haven't experienced the level of discrimination that's happening right now. They don't know what to do. They don't know what that is. They don't know where that comes from. They only knew and saw my friends. They didn't see division. And now to see that come up is throwing people for a loop. And they truly are trying to grapple with this and understand what it means. I also encourage all folks who are parents and those who are not, who have, young children as nieces and nephews, whatever the case may be, just have a conversation with them and ask them truly what's happening in their school, and you will get a very eye-opening lesson as to what our kids are dealing with. And so from that perspective, it's a tremendous challenge when it comes to mental health in our schools. So again, I didn't want to go too long, but it's really important. There's just so much that's going on that we just don't know about. So this is the tip of the iceberg. So thank you very much for your leadership, guys.
Councilmember Glass.
Thank you. Thank you for the comments, Councilmember Rice. Earlier this week or last weekend, I attended the Montgomery County Youth Media Festival and saw firsthand media that's created by our middle schoolers and high schoolers. And the stories that they put together and shared for public consumption were about depression, about bullying, about self-identity, and it could easily be interpreted as cries for help. And they were telling us exactly what they need help with, and the conversations that need to be had, and that's why this is so important. I associate myself with everything that's been said, have seen the work of this program and organization firsthand, fully support all of this. And as Mr. Rice was saying, this crisis manifests itself in so many different ways. And the prevention that this will result in, hopefully, will hopefully decrease incidents of hate, incidents of discrimination, incidents of self-injury. And it is the tip of the iceberg. And it's what we need to do. And so I look forward over the next 3 years filling this out, because it really is important work.
All right, without objection.
Okay, and there's a second proposal from Council Members Joando and Education Committee Chair Albornoz on expanding mental health services for youth. I'm sorry, what? Sorry. The request is that the committee, the Joint Committee, add $200,000 to the reconciliation list to fund 2 full-time licensed mental health therapists to provide services for a total of 4 schools. That'd be 2 schools per therapist. Similar to the linkages to learning and counseling model, schools would be selected based on data from MCPS. And so it'd be $100,000 per therapist and related program costs to address, needs of mental health needs of children. Council staff recommends approval of this item, but makes the comment that that in selecting the schools and determining the contractor for the services, it should be in coordination with what's existing already through HHS and through MCPS. We have a number of different, very different types of mental health services that are going on in the schools, and I actually thought that the Joint Committee might want to hear from Mr. Kroll, Mr. Gales, and Ms. Barnes about the school-based mental health services and how they're being delivered through linkages, through the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Clinic, through school nurses, and understand that, again, how we move forward, hopefully we'll tie together and kind of augment what's existing.
I see Councilmember Joanna's light on. Do you want to wait until after the briefing, or did you have a comment now?
You can go first if
Great.
if that's helpful, yeah.
Good morning. I'm Joanne Barnes, Chief of Children, Youth, and Family Services. I'd like to invite my manager for school and community-based services, Ms. Monica Martin, to come to the dais to talk about the Linkages to Learning program. And as she approaches, I just want to point out to council members and to council staff that as we were looking at the packet for the additions to linkages at Kemp Mill and Summit Hall, that there is an error, we think a typo in the amount that's assigned to Kemp Mill. Okay. Ms. Martin?
Hi, good morning. For the record, Monica Martin, HHS Administrator for Linkages Learning and Acting Administrator for Child and Adolescent School and Community-Based Services. I know you're well aware of the Linkages Initiative, and I think where it exists and what we do there. And in terms of the middle school complement in particular, we're focused primarily in elementary schools. We're in 6 middle schools, and in the middle schools that we are in, primarily have 1 mental health therapist at these schools, which have a lot of need. I believe my boss, Ms. Barnes, wanted me to also make sure I bring to your attention the work that does occur in middle schools and that will be occurring in the future in some middle schools through services that have been named to the state as regional youth services. In the past, they were called Youth Service Center or Youth Service Bureau services. There's a long history to how these services have existed in Montgomery County for 35 to 40 years. They're originally a local overmatch to juvenile delinquency prevention services, but the county has issued an RFP that just closed about 2 weeks ago, and that will be executed in FY20 for using the resources for these services a little bit differently. And so what we propose through this RFP is to realign the funds to have a little bit more of a concentrated effort in secondary schools. And so I will just say briefly that, of course, in consultation with Dr. Bryce's office and MCPS, that we looked at the schools in the county that have the highest farms rates, not percentages, I'm sorry, I said rates, the highest number of children who are enrolled in farms. Not right, exactly, overall numbers, right? So weighted more towards, again, secondary schools. And that the schools that are named in the RFP that are middle schools to receive on-site mental health promotion and intervention services 2 days a week or 1 day a week, depending on what's already existing in that school. In the Up-County area would be Montgomery Village Middle School and Neelsville Middle School. In the Mid-County area would be Argyle and Lee. And in Eastern and Silver Spring would be Francis Scott Key Middle School. Now, there's flexibility in this. It's based on those numbers. Again, in coordination with MCPS, the language in the RFP states that, we could modify, what those sites are and, how we target the resources based on mutual evaluation of need and what's happening locally at those schools. Unlike the proposal that's been put forward, these are time-limited services. The scope of this work is more prevention-oriented, but it is mental health clinical work, and so limited to a degree. So the scope limits services to about 16 sessions per youth. It is only for uninsured and underinsured youth, so not those that have access elsewhere. So you're talking about 4 to 6 months worth of counseling support that will be available, again, on a limited basis in these schools. So that's just an FYI.
Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, and thank you for that, Ms. Martin, and for the benefit of my colleagues, the proposal is to expand in middle schools that are connected to linkages where some of these gaps, so that's helpful to have that guidance, and obviously this money would not be limited in that scope, and there would be no limits to the amount of services students could receive at those schools, so I think it's critically important. I mean, all my colleagues, as you've heard, are committed to, as are everyone at the testimony table today, and I've talked to Dr. Cry. I think one of the first meetings I had when I came on board, and I have a meeting with Dr. Bryce, was like, how do we figure out and expand school-based mental health services and have a continuum of care that is, over the next several years, like we have a plan for early child care and education. I think we need a similar plan to scale up at scale, and we've talked about this too with Chair Albanaz. So I'm excited that there's broad-scale commitment on your side, on the county government side, also in the council. And, obviously we're in the budget season, so I think when we have opportunities to make improvements, even if they might be slight, we need to do it. But please know that I'm very eager this summer and going forward to continue the conversation about how we set up a continuum. And I know you're in process of doing that with how you train the rest of your staff. And so I think this is a good moment in time for us to really, and it's needed. I mean, we know the need is here. So I appreciate the support. And just to be clear, this would add, I want to make sure we're adding these in, I think we discussed adding them in 2 tranches, correct? So 100,000 for each therapist, and each therapist could cover 2 schools. You mentioned 4 middle schools, and I'm glad that there's already been some work on identifying where they might go and what they might do. And I know there's a number of providers that could be the contractor. We're not speaking to that, but just wanted to chime in on that piece for my colleagues' benefit.
Councilmember Rice?
So, Ms. Martin, and again, I support the direction that Councilmember Joando is going in, but if I understand, what you're saying is the current RFP that you have out is to do some limited service at those particular schools. And so my question for Councilmember Joando is that would it not be better for us to add this money to supplement what's already been done in terms of the formalized RFP to provide full service at those? And
that's what that's my
so that's the
intention.
mess.
That's
Okay,
the intention.
okay. So it builds on what's already, the work that's already there. So this is to help supplement so that whatever that gets us in terms of additional time, hours, days, all those kinds of things. That's what, thank you. I just wanted to make sure, because I think that's what you were saying. Respectfully, is to say that we're already doing some of this work, so maybe we should follow that. Am I clear?
Absolutely. It would be very easy to connect those dots and do
There
that
you go.
strategically in that.
Okay, all right, terrific.
I just had one thing, and those development years from 6th to 8th grade are critical. There's a lot going on biologically around that time, and I vividly remember how challenging middle school was in my life and in my development, and then you add on that all these other layers of pressures regarding poverty and social media and pressures, and it's just too much to bear. So I think that the investment from the middle out makes a lot of sense, and I look forward to working collaboratively on that continuum, because this does obviously have significant public health ramifications over the life expectancy of these individuals and their communities. So thank you. I think, Ms. Yao, was there anything else or any other comments? Dr. Crowell?
Well, I think you wanted to talk a little bit about what else is going on in terms of.
Yes, please.
Either Travis or I can go and talk about it. Okay, so just a couple of things, and I'm grateful that you all are raising this as someone who's a fan of behavioral health and wellness. This is a pleasure to have this conversation always. I think a couple of quick numbers. One is that 2018, and this is about referrals to the Crisis Center from Montgomery County Public Schools, 1,800 students referred. 2019, we're expecting to top 2,000. That number will be in excess, will be twice the number we saw in 2015. So every year, the number of referrals is going up. Some of that is just the good work and collaboration between MCPS and HHS, but some of that is reflective of the challenges and the pressures that our children are facing and that we see. 41% of those are from middle schools, so this sentiment about middle schools and targeting that is important, because that transition from elementary to middle school is an important and critical time. Being on the receiving end of that and having someone on the receiving end of that is important. We're also seeing 31% of our referrals from high school and 25% from elementary schools, just to not belabor that. So in elementary school, we're seeing problems brewing that are in full boil by the time we get to middle school, and the pot's overwhelming by the time we get to high school. So this is a progressive problem that is going to be with us over years. Suicidal threat, suicidal behavior, self-injurious behavior, such as cutting, account for 1,200 of the referrals, 1,200 of those 1,800 referrals in 2018, and similar numbers for 2019 this year to date, although those aren't fully in for us yet. I think I'll talk about the other things that we do as needed, but I want to make sure I give Dr. Gill some space to talk about things. But One of the points about this is that 53% of a student's waking hours are spent outside of school. The reasons that they show up at the crisis center don't talk about the reasons beneath the reasons. So we're talking about why we see them, why they get to us, but we don't know what those reasons are. And if 53% of that time is outside of school, some of those reasons lists sit outside of school. School represents a perfect opportunity to capture and identify and connect with students. That has to be something that is connected to dynamically and linked to what's going on outside the school for our kids. So there's evenings and weekends and nights, the text and chat lines that we're talking about, the work that linkages to learning that expands just beyond the idea of a mental health person sitting in a room doing therapy, but includes understanding of and connecting to other services and supports that they need in the community over the weekends. Those are important pieces of this that I think we should not lose sight of. The school system, we don't leave them in the business of doing mental health alone. They got a full-time job trying to educate folks, and there's some mental health pieces that they have to do around that as part of that, and I know that they're working on that in their curriculum and in teaching their staff, but they can't do that alone. So we have to do this in partnership if we really want a healthier and better outcomes for our youth. The Crisis Center serves the numbers you've heard. We also do a fair amount of mobile, we have a mobile child crisis stabilization team that engages with students and does some of that aftercare work and reaches into the schools and works with families to connect them up to what they need and support. We engage with principals as needed and as requested for things like screenings or educational services and positive youth development kinds of activities, and in response to unfortunate incidents such as suicides where there's some trauma in the schools, and the schools have requested that we join them on that. We accept referrals for SASCA for substance abuse and screening services to try to link children up with services, and the schools makes referrals to us around that. I think there are probably other things that we do and could do more of and will do more of in the future. I think that's sort of a quick summary from the behavioral health and crisis services side of the table. And I'll turn this over to Dr. Gales.
Good morning, Travis Gales, Health Officer, Chief of Public Health Services. To add on to the services that everyone has described, within the school health centers, the school nurses and techs are trained to be able to triage the first signs of mental health concerns. As we discussed in our previous hearing, most often and most frequently in young folks and adolescents, they don't present with the outward complaint. It's some type of somatic complaint that typically is the first manifestation or the presented manifestation of the mental health concern. And so each year our staff is trained through the mental health first aid platform to be able to do that triage and some of that early diagnosis and linkage to those other support services, whether it's linkage within the school or referrals to the crisis services centers. One of the initiatives that we're working on and or have been moving forward on is looking at how we can utilize our health and wellness centers after hours for care. We did do some surveillance analysis within the catchment areas of our 4 high school centers. And one of the issues that did pop up, particularly in the Gaithersburg area, was there was a significant need and desire to have behavioral health services or access to those services. And so what we are in the process of trying to figure out how to do the procurement of those services, but ultimately we would be piloting programs at Wheaton High School and Gaithersburg High School Health and Wellness Centers to use that space after hours, or to allow outside providers to utilize that space after hours to be able to provide services. And one of those that we have prioritized is behavioral health services. The other piece to think about too is that Dr. Kroll mentioned and Monica mentioned as well, is the fact that there's so many other components that go into how kids spend their time. And just in a 2-second summary, some of the work that we did in Chicago some years ago is we looked at the notion and concept of what we call socioeconomic disconnection. And we had called it idleness in terms of having idle space when kids are out of school or not connected. And we looked at it particularly as it related to increased risk of high-risk sexual behavior and acquisition of HIV. And we did find that for a particular subgroup of kids within Chicago, or not kids, as a pediatrician I call everybody under 24 kids, But for young people who were socioeconomically disconnected, meaning that they weren't engaged in school and they didn't have economic opportunities for employment, we did find that their HIV infection rates were higher. And so we constructed programming aimed at that group to say, yes, we will continue the traditional public health messages of access to condoms and so forth. But there was a component to talk about, what are your other opportunities within your life? What are your realities, and what can we do to address those other concerns to do that? So I would say that in moving forward, we continue, fortunately, those efforts are already in place, but continue to look at those outside factors that are driving particular behaviors, the self-injury, the vaping, high-risk sexual behavior. The actual act is simply the manifestation of the root cause of what's happening. So we have a responsibility within public health to step up our game in terms of educating folks in the community, making sure that people understand what the signs and symptoms of mental health are. So as Councilmember Rice talked about in terms of parents needing to be more aware. So, when your kid does have that favorite activity that all of a sudden they're not interested in anymore, or they're starting to have some unexplained physical symptoms that aren't really tied to anything or can be easily explained. So educating folks on the warning signs, because kids aren't going to come and say, hey, I'm having a problem, I'm thinking about suicide, I was bullied at school, I don't feel safe. It's the other ways that will, that they will communicate to us. And so we have to step up our game in terms of educating folks about what those signs are, and we will go back to the drawing board and figure out how we can do that better.
Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you for that. It's very helpful. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, Dr. Gales, you mentioned the kind of frontline CNA and nurse work. And I want to commend this committee and our chairs, Albanaz and Rice, for putting on the reconciliation and sending a letter to the county executive adding school nurses. I'm disappointed, frankly, that we didn't get a formal response, and that the response we got today from OMB was not to add that. And I just don't understand how we're having this 2-hour discussion and an hour and a half of it about the mental health needs of our kids, and not to mention the physical needs and the overburdened nature of the nurses. So I just want to commend the chairs for sending the letter and this committee for taking action, and just hope we can do better on the I know it's no one's here for. I know you're the practitioners. I'm sure you'd want to do it, but I just want to think that needs to be on the record that we are disappointed collectively that budget adjustment was not made. And I thank my colleagues for supporting this effort to go on the rec list. Thank you.
All right, I think that's it. That concludes this joint committee work session. Thank you all very much. Thank you.